Right, good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Angela. We've no listed speakers.
Given the official chief planning officer pen.
There you go.
Thank you, Mark.
We have no public speakers this morning, so I don't need to go in terms of describing the procedure. I want to remind members that we are being recorded. There's two aspects to this. One of them is that it's going to be put on YouTube, and hopefully can help some of the parish councils in terms of they can refer to it and watch the debate and possibly appreciate the way we come to decisions. So without further ado, attend to the housekeeping, declaration of interest. None. Confirmation of minutes of the meeting which was held on the 27th of April. Is this a correct record? Fine. All in agreement? Substitute members, Lindsay?
Just one this morning, Chairman. Councillor Clayton for Councillor Speak.
Welcome. Welcome, Alan. Planning matters. The batting order this morning is item 5, followed by 1, 3, 4, 2. So item 5 is very similar to the one we dealt with at Staining at the last meeting. Andrew.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure, did the Chairman remind you about using your microphones? I'm not sure if I heard that, but I'm told that that's something as part of the filming. We need to. I know there's not many of us here today, but we need to use our microphones for the filming equipment to pick it up. Okay, good. Right, this application relates to property 525 Clifton Drive North. So it's a residential dwelling. It's in the area shown there. So it's on the sort of going towards Blackpool part of St Anne's. Fronting onto Clifton Drive. It's a detached house which fronts onto Clifton Drive. It's quite a large 3-storey property, reasonably large curtilage and a double garage to the rear, and it's in the settlement area with residential properties all around. The application that we're looking at today is for a change of use of that property, which is from its lawful use as a dwelling into a C2 use, so that's to provide accommodation for up to 2 young persons along with their resident carers. There's no physical alterations or extensions to the property or the curtilage or the site in any way, and the Town Council had no objections, no observations, and we've not received any neighbour comments either to the application. But we've been asked to bring it to the committee at the Chairman's request as set out in the agenda papers, and the application is one that's recommended for approval. So just looking at it in a bit more detail for you, that's the property. So it's got a reasonably deep front garden from Clifton Drive, and this is Kilgrimwell Gardens that comes up the side, and the detached garage. So it's the one underneath the yellow arrow. So you can see it's a 2-storey house that's had effectively another storey added to it with dormers. It's in a row of similarly scaled properties, albeit with varying designs. Just looking down the side road, so you've got Kilgrimwell Gardens here, footpaths either side, double garage to the property, parking spaces in front of it. In terms of the layout, this is the existing plan, which I'm not sure how clear it is, but it's got ground floor accommodation, 3 bedrooms at first floor, and then a sort of an extra bedroom up in that loft space. The proposal is to not make any alterations to the building, but you would have the accommodation at ground floor, and then at first floor you'd have bedroom to the front, bedroom to the rear for the young persons, and then a staff bedroom in the middle, with the upper floor used as the office for the staff to use, and then any additional sort of temporary sleeping accommodation that might be required would also be able to be accommodated in that space. I understand that we may have a speaker. I don't want you to break here, or whether you want me to complete the presentation and do the speaker. Right, okay. Come to the end. So in terms of the consideration of the application, the current use is clearly as a residential dwelling, so that falls within Class C3. It's as a residential property. The proposed use is, as I said, to provide accommodation for 2 young persons, but as these cannot form a household, it's not a C3 use. Case law, particularly a case from North Devon, says that where you've got young persons and resident carers together, that is not a single household, so is not a C3 use. But the question as to whether that needs planning permission is only triggered, the need for planning permission is only triggered if there is a material change of use. So it's whether the facts of the use that's being proposed are materially different from the existing lawful use as a dwelling. So just looking at the sort of indicators that could make a material change of use, there's no physical work being proposed, so it will continue to look like a dwelling. The trips may change, but they may not. There will be staff coming and going. The children will be going to education. There will be staff changes. There'll be shopping, leisure, all those sorts of things. But that's commonplace with any dwelling. So the question is whether 2 young persons living in a property like that with the carers, is that materially different from how a family could live in that property with, you know, it's 4 bedrooms. I think the officer view on that is that it wouldn't be a material change. The parking situation, well, that's not been amended. There's adequate parking on the property for the uses, whether it's residential or whether it's in use as this care facility. So the officer view on this is that there isn't a material change of use, and so this doesn't need planning permission. What normally happens is the businesses or the applicants who are looking to promote this type of use apply for a certificate of lawfulness, which is asking us to confirm whether planning permission is needed. And we've had dozens of those in recent years and have by and large confirmed that the cases are that they don't need planning permission. In this case, the agent has decided to apply for planning permission. So whether or not planning permission is required, we have a duty to determine that application. So just looking at the planning merits, clearly it's a residential area, it's a residential related use, it's accessible to services, there's no physical changes to the development, to the property, the level of activity is going to be the same or similar. So it's certainly somewhere that if there had been a change of use, I would be expecting us to be supporting the scheme. So given that there are no planning objections and there's a likelihood that a strong likelihood that planning permission isn't required, the recommendation to the committee is that we grant planning permission.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor James.
Thank you.
Councillor Armour, put his hand up.
There we go. Right, thank you. I represent the residents of St Leonard's Ward along with Councillors Karen Butley and Delma Collins. Councillor Butley is unable to attend today due to work commitments and has asked me to address the committee. Firstly, may I thank the Chairman for agreeing for this application to come before the committee today. I will be obviously reiterating some of the things that you've just mentioned. But 2 years ago, an application for a certificate of lawfulness for a change of use from C3 dwelling house to a C2 residential institution at a property in Seaton Crescent, St Anne's, which is round the corner from the property under consideration today, was granted to allow the home to be used for 3 children in care. The residents only became aware of the plans because of a lot of work was done to the building to reconfigure the rooms, as well as some external works which drew attention to the property. A culture of fear for subsequent antisocial behaviour quickly grew in that neighbourhood, where there are many elderly residents. Advice from our planning officers was sought, and it was confirmed that the ward councillor had no role in such an application. There was no requirement for notice to be given to neighbours and no role for the planning committee. As members will understand, this caused frustration amongst residents who felt deprived of a democratic voice. Blackpool Council, being a unitary, considered their own policy regarding changes from C3 to C2 some time ago and decided that, in their opinion, this constituted a material change which require a planning application. They had done so following a large influx of children's homes and the demands upon their services as a result. Councillor Buckley asked for a similar policy to be considered by members of our planning committee in 2020 and is waiting for that to be presented. Of particular interest is whether the policy change in Blackpool has had a knock-on effect and led to more change of use applications being filed. I am pleased to say that no further issues have been brought to ward councillors' attentions concerning the use of the property at Seaton Crescent since the children arrived. However, a concern has been raised regarding the proximity of that address to the address under consideration today, which is literally round the corner. I ask the committee to consider A, whether a local policy is or should be in place to address proximity of residential homes and therefore defer today's application, and B, to seek an understanding from the head of planning to bring forward a policy paper for discussion at the next Planning Policy Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes. Councillor Jakes, you've asked for this item to be deferred until there is a decided policy in how we deal with such applications. But last month we had a similar application in Staining. The reasons for granting approval was very similar to the debate that I am sure will follow this application. The officer has given notice that it's case law which determines the approval. And on numerous occasions, the lead officer has stated categorically, definitively, that while there is a material change of use from C3 to C2, it isn't so material as to require planning application to be dealt with by committee. It could have been done by certificate of lawfulness. Again, that was explained by the officer.
Two people that want to speak.
Yeah, I've got a list of speakers who want to speak. So that's just the background, Angela, to why this committee is restrained in terms of following your request for deferment. I have 3 speakers. I think it's Councillors Armit, David O'Rourke and Kieran Mulholland.
Linda Nolte as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Well, given what you've just said there in terms of the clarity of not needing planning permission and the change of use, I'm happy to propose this as it stands. I think we did it last month. I can see why it's come back again as a different example this month. I can understand why we're looking at it. but we did it last month. I don't see any difference here this month to last month. It's absolutely nothing to do with planning, but operationally, I can't think of anywhere worse to put two children in terms of over a mile and a half from a school, a shop, or anywhere. You're totally isolating two kids here, but that's nothing to do with planning. That's to do with operations. So I'm happy to propose.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if my point is relevant. It's been proposed and seconded, but I would just like to ask Mr. Stell just to clarify a bit further the comment that because there's only two residents or two children involved here, the case law would suggest that the planning consent is not actually required. But of course, we appear to be granting it, and I just wanted to clarify that point, if you follow me, as to whether we need to grant planning permission or not.
Yeah, the issue is that we've received a planning application, so we have a duty as the planning authority to come to a decision on that. Normally we would determine decisions in accordance with planning policy, and that's what we will do here as well. But as part of the material considerations, we would look at whether the development that's taking place or is proposed, firstly, is development, and secondly, whether it's development that requires a planning permission in itself. So the officer view here is that the change of use that's involved isn't a material one, and that means it doesn't require planning permission. So that can only be a factor in favour of granting an approval, because we don't have the opportunity to refuse it. And perhaps I'm not explaining it very well. Perhaps if we look at a more usual way of an extension to a property, permitted development allows you to extend your property by 2-3 metres at the back. So you can do that without any contact with the planning authority at all, subject to size criteria and things. But you could also submit a planning application for that, and we would just look at that and say, well, they can do this without us making a decision, so we have no grounds to refuse it, and we'll have to grant planning permission. So it's the same kind of argument here, if that sort of physical change puts it in a better context.
Yes, thank you. I think that example of an extension under permitted development rights where somebody applies it is a very good one. And so I think what we're saying to sum up really is, although they don't need planning consent, they've applied for it, and therefore we must determine it, and clearly we can't refuse it. So thank you.
Yeah, I think perhaps this application and the one that we dealt with last time, coincidentally, were submitted by the same agent, and that agent is based in Blackpool, so it could well be that they're more familiar with the arrangements that Councillor Jakes alluded to operate in Blackpool, due to the policy that they have, which requires that the applications come to, the applications are, that require that an application is submitted for the proposed use. So that's probably what's led to them to do that, rather than picking up the phone and asking us how we interpret these things. But that's clearly the agent's approach, if that wants.
Okay, thank
they
you.
want to take that.
Did make a reference to how these applications are dealt with in Blackpool. In spite of case law, Blackpool decided to go down the route of seeking a planning application. Another council in the area, I think it might have been Stockport, Mike, who's gone down a similar path to Blackpool. And this was trying to restrain and restrict the number of this similar applications going before council. So they've never been challenged, but if they were challenged as an authority with that policy, then I think they would lose. Councillor Mulholland.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, I can see this from both sides. We have a few in Wesham that haven't caused a problem. The only problem being that people did not know this was happening. And the problems arise because people don't know it's happening. The children themselves don't seem to cause any more problem than any other children. But of course you get a variety of vehicles arriving at properties and people think what's going on. So I can see that if it did come sort of as a notification, then people in the area would be aware that was happening and be able to say, yes, this is, you know, if it's got appropriate parking spaces and what have you. I mean, one of them in Wesham didn't have, but it still carries on. Because it is the amount of carers and people swapping over and things that people try to make it a problem. In reality, it's not a problem because that happens in everybody's home. So I can see and welcome a report on it, but I don't think every single one applying for planning permission is the right way to go about it. And I just wonder if there's another way of notification sort of thing.
I think we appreciate you deal with each application on its own.
Exactly. But so I can see, but for this one, there's nothing wrong with it at all. And the fact that it's in close proximity to another one, well, you could have 3 bad families in a row, and there's not a thing you can do about it. You can have a hairdresser opening next to a hairdresser, and there's not a thing you can do about it. So I think those sorts of arguments fall. So, I'm in favour of certainly this one and look forward to whatever presentation comes forward. But I'm happy as we are, really.
Yeah, one of the reasons why the chairman decided to bring it to committee rather than delegate it to the offices was a public relations exercise, really, to rehearse the issues. We did it at Staining last committee meeting. Now we've got this one in St Anne's, and a report will be coming to the committee to describe what the new policy will be. Councillor Jane Nixon, Gavin Harrison, and Tim wants to come back.
Thanks, Chairman. Do we have assurances that there will only ever be, like it's just been mentioned, it is a very, very large property, as is the one in Staining. Do we have assurances that it will only be for 2 children, or is that's nothing to do with planning?
Well, it's just in the sense that if following on from Councillor Mulholland, if in the future we receive an application extending the numbers from 2 to 10 or 8 or whatever, we will deal with it.
But would we receive an application?
Chairman, I can help with that if I can.
Thank you.
Clearly the concerns that Councillor Mulholland expressed are ones that we queried as well. This is a big house, 2 kids. The applicant has confirmed that is their intention, that's the way that they want to operate it, whether, you know, there's different funding streams and, you know, the way that things work, I don't know. But they have told us that yes, 2 children is the number they are looking for there. There is a condition that controls the use to that has been applied for. So if they did want to have 3 children, then that would be something that they would need to come back to us for. Okay. Because of the way that they've gone about this.
Yeah. So given that they've got this, but then the fact that it's been mentioned that Blackpool have a policy and we're getting, it appears that this gentleman is now aware of Blackpool's policy and he wants to come into the failed area, etc., and use premises in the failed. Okay, he's applying for... Moving forward, if we have nothing in place, will they just be able to buy a house, use it without any planning permissions, etc.? So it could go that we would never know the change of use in these.
We will deal with that as a new application when it arrives.
But what application do they actually have to make? So they could just buy a house and open it and say, right, this is what we're using it for.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, perhaps I've confused things. It's the agent that's decided to submit the application. It's a different applicant here to the applicant that we dealt with last time. So it's the agent.
Yeah, but what if they just decide to stop applying and just do it?
Well, if it doesn't involve a development that requires a change of use or requires planning permission because of the scale of the change of use, then they don't need permission for it. Although there are other licensing regimes from Ofsted and the like that would supervise those premises. I just wondered, Chairman, at this point, whether it might be helpful for Mark to come in, because I think he's going to... I'm sorry for chairing the meeting for you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just in terms of the report to committee on that was a report to outline the issues around the need for a change of use as opposed to a policy which you would apply in terms of an application. So I've given the leader a commitment to bring a report to committee. It was some time ago, but unfortunately between then and now there's been other things happening and other priorities that I've been presented with. So it has slipped down. It won't be possible to bring something to the next meeting because the deadline is fast approaching for that. So I would not propose to bring it to the June policy meeting, but probably the one following that at the moment is a reasonable proposition. I think just to comment on the certificate of lawfulness side of things though, there is no requirement for somebody to obtain a certificate of lawfulness to demonstrate they don't need planning permission. It is just a piece of paper to demonstrate and give them comfort that they don't need to apply. So, like I say, that is as a sort of documentation to demonstrate that there has been no change of use or something is not development. So you could have a situation, going back to Councillor Nixon's point, you could have a situation whereby people just don't apply and just set up the facilities with or without the paperwork in place. So I think part of the understanding of this is that if the more sort of open, whether it's through a planning application or through a certificate of lawfulness, that people are, at least there is that knowledge that things are happening in some way, shape or form. Bearing in mind that all of these things have got to be subject to separate regulation as well, not just planning, to address the other aspects there. But like I say, I will bring something to committee shortly. Like I say, unfortunately, it won't be the next meeting, but probably the meeting after that.
Yeah, perhaps just coming back on that point, that whilst there's no obligation for them to make an application under either for a certificate or planning permission under the planning legislation, they do tend to do that, and I believe that that's perhaps a requirement of the other licensing legislation that they have to have. They have to have some piece of paper from the local authority that says they're okay doing this in this particular property, whether it's a certificate of lawfulness or a planning permission. So I think the ones that slip under the radar are probably, that's perhaps a fear that's unlikely to be realised because of that other requirement.
I think the officers have addressed the concerns you've raised, Councillor Nixon. Councillors Gavin Harrison, followed by Councillor Tim Armit.
Thanks, Chairman. I think the officers have more or less addressed the point I was going to raise, which again comes back to the policy. And putting it bluntly, I think that policy meeting needs to look at why applicants are coming here rather than going through Blackpool's policy. Are they in some way, and again I use the term advisedly, are they in some way seeing coming to file as a soft touch compared to going through Blackpool? If so, what is it that Blackpool are doing that we are not? Should there be a level playing field?
I think applications are still being received at Blackpool. It's just they're receiving the applications for planning permission rather than certificates of lawfulness. I don't think it's stemmed the tide, if again, overly dramatic phrase, but I don't think it's, it's changed it in that respect.
Okay, thank you. I think it's just a perception then. But
Chairman, I might be able to help a little bit on the status of Blackpool's policy. whether or not a development needs planning permission is a matter of law, depending on whether there's been a material change of use or not. That's a matter of law. Blackpool's policy states the position they will take on whether or not there's been a material change of use, but it can't change the law. So the test of that, the proof of that particular pudding, would be if a developer challenged the stance which Blackpool have taken based on their policy. That hasn't been the case as yet, but as I think you've heard the chairman indicate, we're far from convinced that if challenged, Blackpool's policy would actually stand up to that challenge.
So far, so good, but there's still a perception that the applicants are using the path of least resistance, and until and unless Blackpool is challenged, we are likely to see an increasing number of these applicants. But they're clearly not doing that, are they? But is it just this agent? I think we need to address it as policy, and it needs to be robustly considered. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, sir, can I just going back on that particular point, I think the issue there is that if, I think as the chairman says, if they'd submitted a certificate of lawfulness because they find it difficult to get planning permission in Blackpool, then I think that might be some evidence that they're coming here rather than Blackpool. But because they submitted an application in filed where they would expect that to be subject to the same policy considerations rather than a do we need permission, don't we need permission question, I think that sort of indicates that it's not why they come in here, it's for other reasons, and I don't know what those might be, but obviously one of the issues is that we do keep an eye on how, you know, on the overall sort of numbers, etc. Although, let's say from a policy point of view, it's difficult to resist that.
Just a quick question. To operate as sort of a quasi-children's home in this way, do you have to be licensed by someone to do it as well? So does this also go through a different route, so it doesn't need planning? It has to go somewhere else where it is also discussed and reviewed. It's not a planning issue, it's an operational issue?
There's an Ofsted licensing regime that's overarching for all these homes, whether they have planning permission or not. So that's, whereas I was referencing, I think the piece of paper from the local planning authority is one of the things that they look for.
So to go back to Councillor Jake's original concern then, in the granting of a licence, is there any liaison with neighbours, or is it purely an operational capability review?
My understanding is that it is just an operational management, physical characteristics of the property thing, rather than a relationship with the neighbours.
So other than via us, the council wouldn't need to be involved whatsoever in this happening?
No.
Okay.
Vice Chair. Go to the vote.
It's been an interesting debate. I just want to make the fact that actually I applaud the agent for actually coming down this particular route for a number of reasons. We've already been told that, all right, there's a neighbouring authority that has a different policy, but actually he's not gone down the certificate of lawfulness route. He wants full planning permission. And I think that actually also addresses something that Councillor Nulty quite rightly raised, and that one of the real challenges here is not the experience of what happens, which is often, more often than not, a positive experience. And putting children in care in an appropriate residential setting with facilities in a sustainable location. But what it actually does, by going through the planning process and a planning application, it allows residents to know what is going on and gives them actually notice of what's going on, rather than just something happening and then them finding out about it. So I actually just wanted to briefly say that I think the agent has done absolutely the right thing, and I think it's the right thing that this was brought to the committee, that we could explore all of these things, and there are clearly policy issues that we could be looking at further ahead, which I also think is the right direction in which to move. But I would be supporting this.
Thank you. It's been moved for approval by Councillor Tim Armit, seconded by Councillors Alan Clayton. All in favour of the officer's recommendation to approve, please show. Anyone against? Well, that's unanimous. I appreciate that and thank you. As indicated at the beginning of the meeting, the batting order following item 5 is 1342. So we now go to Peel Hill Westby, item 1.
Okay, item 1, Peel Hill. So it's a residential property. It's an extension to a residential property. This is a slightly oddly located pocket of residential development up near White Hills. So that's the junction 4, B&Q, and there's this pocket of properties there. Semi-detached house. Planning permission was granted in 2021 for an extension to the property and a replacement garage. Those works have started, but the garage that they have started constructing but ceased is larger than that, which got permission in 2021. So this application relates to that, along with a decking area and a fence. It's at committee because the parish council are concerned about the increased garage and the lack of a justification for this additional space. But the scheme's recommended for approval. So just looking at the property itself, I say it's an unusual area, pocket of development. This is a slightly unusual property in that it's a pair of semis in a row of detached, and the neighbouring properties around them kind of wrap around the back of their property, as you can see from the image on your right. So this is the application site as it was. So it's the right-hand side of that pair of semis. This is the neighbouring detached house. The neighbouring property, you can see from this picture, has a previously existing single-storey extension to the rear. And the application property had this outbuilding to the rear at sort of the back corner of the garden. That's just caught the back wall of the garden and that picture there. So the planning permission that they got permission for was for a typical single garage type structure going into that back corner where this area is here. What they've actually commenced work building is a larger garage that starts somewhere behind the rear of the property and extends back up to that rear corner. Rather than having the pitched roof that you saw on the previous slide, this has a flat roof, and it provides a garage area with a garden room, summer room, whatever, in that back corner with patio doors that look out onto the garden area. There's also a decking area, a raised decking area off the back of the single-storey extension, and then a fence that runs, in fact, see it better here, a fence that runs alongside that decking area to provide privacy to the neighbouring adjoining property. Looking at some pictures, so this top picture is effectively the equivalent picture to the one I showed you earlier. So you can see next door's extension. They've now built this extension to the rear, which is authorised by the 2021 permission. This is the decking area. Sorry, not decking, it's a raised patio. This is the raised fence. And then this is the front of the garage. And then you can see it extends back to this rear area here. But obviously work has ceased on it at this point. Some other images, this is perhaps the equivalent to the earlier picture, so you can see that the intention is to have the garage at the front and then this sort of patio area, enclosed summer room, whatever, at the back here. See from this image that the neighbour has a outbuilding at the back where his garden wraps around, so there's no adverse impact on the neighbour from that aspect. In terms of planning issues raised, it's in the countryside where planning policy GD4 applies. That allows extensions and subject to some scale requirements, but as this is an outbuilding, it's outside of that policy, so we don't have any sort of H7 scale issues to mull over. What we do have to look at is the normal planning considerations about whether that garage is appropriate in its scale for the plot that it sits on. And looking at the site plan and the area around that, I don't feel that there is any issue created by the extended length of that garage. I think the design works in terms of the more modern approach that they've applied to the extension to the property and the one next door. Of the neighbours, the garage impacts potentially the neighbour on the other side, but they've got a driveway separation, and with the flat roof, there's no particular massing or loss of light issues. So overall, the garage element isn't an area of concern. The decking and the raised platform and fence, alongside something similar to the neighbour. The fence helps privacy between the two. No objections have been raised from that adjoining neighbour. The garage neighbour has raised some queries over the party wall and some other, and the fact that it's different to what they got permission for originally, but those are not matters that are for consideration in our decision, and so the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Andrew. Open to debate. Dave, you're beating me to it. So it's been moved by Councillor Kieran Mulholland and seconded by Councillor David O'Rourke. Debate? None. In that case, I'll put that proposition to the committee. All in favour of approval, please show. Anyone against? Clearly carried, unanimous, thank you. We move on to item 3.
Yeah, we're going to go to the piggeries.
The piggeries, Crackleton, Councillor Mulholland, Jermaine.
It was the chairman that mentioned that. So, I second his suggestion, but obviously it was the chairman who mentioned. So this is very much on the edge of Freckleton. See from the red circle on the screen there. Got the runway just tipping into the picture here, so I'll reference that later. And we're actually on the lower level, so we're on the estuary level where this property is, with the remainder of the village is largely on the higher level, so this is slightly lower level. So it's alongside the creek. As I say, it's on the lower level. There is planning permission on the site for 3 dwellings. It was granted on appeal back in 2009 and has been rolled forward several times since. It's different schemes, different landowners. But development has now commenced on the 3 plots. Well, it's commenced on 2 of the 3 plots. And this application is one of 2 that's been submitted. There's 2 different builders, so one's building 2 and the other's building this one. And both have looked to revise the schemes that were approved slightly. This one's here because of an objection from the parish council. The other one wasn't subject to an objection from the parish council, so is to be determined under delegated powers and will be determined relatively shortly. The parish council's comments relate to, they had some the Environment Agency initially raised objection to the application, and the parish council sort of supported the EA's position. The EA have since withdrawn their objections, so I went back to the parish council, but they wanted to maintain their view on that point, and also raised some concerns over the increased scale of the dwelling. So I've just put that clarification in the late observations papers from you. There have been no neighbour comments to the application, but unfortunately we haven't had any comments from BAE. There was some communication slip-up, I believe. So given where it is, I appreciate it's on the lower level, but given where it was in the approach flight path to the runway, I feel that we should have BAE's comments. So the recommendation is to delegate the decision to officers once I've got those comments and can consider them. So just to tell you what the scheme is, this is the site. So it was an overgrown area of land next to the creek, which follows that line. Previously, it held some piggeries. So a picture from the 60s shows the piggery buildings on the site. What it looks like now is this is the road poolside or sort of track poolside. So these are the properties under construction. So that's plot 2. So again, that's plot 2. The application site we're looking at is plot 3. So this is the corner of plot 3 that's under construction. Plot 1 is over here and it has yet to start. So these are some other images looking down poolside on a sunny morning a couple of weeks ago. So you can see that plot 2 is largely completed. It's not fitted out, but the structure's there. Plot 3 is just at kind of ground floor level. In terms of the changes that they're introducing, this is rotated 90 degrees, but this is plot 3, and the red line shows the permission that they've got, and the black line, the more solid line, shows how they're looking to change it. So they're moving it along slightly, they're filling in this back corner, and they're making the garage slightly larger and introducing this turning area. And that was the issue that the Environment Agency were concerned about because of the proximity of that to the creek, Dowbrook or Freckleton Creek or whatever it's called in that location. They were concerned primarily about access for maintenance, but it's since been confirmed that the maintenance that they do from the other side, where it's much more level, rather than this is a relatively steep slope. So looking at that sort of in a factual basis rather than just a measurement on a plan, they've been able to withdraw their objection because it wasn't serving any purpose. So the changes to the property, this is what has permission. So detached house, 2-storey, but it's got this bite out of the back corner. The proposal, detached house, 2-storey, some accommodation in the roof, so it's slightly taller. That bite in the back corner has been filled in, so it's got more of a rectangular footprint. This is the two properties sat alongside each other, front elevations. So they've got rid of these stone coins that are perhaps a slightly dated feature, add a bit more modern arrangement to the windows. You can see the height increase there, which it's taller, but it's not massively taller. That's how it looks in the street scene. So this is showing plots 2 and plot 1, which have also had a similar modern refresh, different builder, same architect. This is the garage change. So when it first came in, it was effectively a 2-storey garage, but it's been reduced in length and reduced in height to sit more comfortably on the plot. One of the changes that I mentioned is that the building has been slid along to separate it from plot 2. So this is plot 2, this is plot 3. One of the benefits that brings is it opens up the views that this guy benefits from. This is the only building on the lower level that's got any sort of amenity consideration. So I think this is some form of a garage, store, summer house at the bottom of that guy's garden. So he now benefits. Where I've took that picture behind me is the estuary, so he gets views across to Clifton Marsh through that gap. This image shows the relationship to the brook. So the brook's down here. I've put this image to show this is the garden area that the property would benefit from. I think one of the concerns raised by the parish council is that the property is increased in size, it's over large for the plot. Well, it is increased in size, but it does retain a reasonable area of garden to serve the residential amenity needs of the occupiers. And what this slide says is that everything's okay, which is what I've said in my presentation.
Yeah, extremely.
The outstanding comments are from BAE.
Not from Ministry of Defence.
No.
Because
They deal with their safety aspects there. So it's the...
Right, well, I'll just ask, I'm quite happy with that, but I'll just ask officers to bear in mind that sometimes BAE, depending on personnel, I assume, BAE can come up with some objections that don't always make sense. So it's just like, I mean, I know when we had the Donkey Creek Farm incident with the fence, we queried it, but it didn't seem to make sense to us, and they more or less immediately withdrew. So I'd just like the officers to be aware of that situation, in case there's personalities involved. But I'm more than happy to move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chairman.
I will second that. When you start looking at this particular application, at first there's some concern, because although these are minor material amendments, you go down the list and there are a number of things that are different and bigger. You know, height of the dwelling, the overall footprint, the design has changed. The garage, bigger. And then we also look at the other element, which is the repositioning of the particular property. So I sort of went through those and looked at, you know, the setting, etc. And although they are bigger or different, when you look at the size of the plot, and you look at because there always is an amenity impact in terms of neighbours and etc. And we sometimes have to accept that, but is it reasonable, or is it, you know, does it tip the balance in terms of this is not acceptable in planning terms? I personally don't think it is, but I think it's worth drawing attention to the fact that there are also some advantages in that with the repositioning of the property, although there is a length element to it along the road, actually there is a greater separation between the next property because it's skewed slightly. And okay, this was the original application for this development, as you rightly say, was through on appeal, and we weren't very happy with. But we are where we are. We're judging the application on its merits that's presented to us here and now. And, you know, I think in terms of the overall development, I could actually say in design terms, it's falling in line with the other properties. So there is a sort of symmetry there and a synergy in terms of the whole scheme. So I'm very happy to second this for approval.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Any other speaker? In that case, let's just clarify what we're voting on. And it isn't a simple approval, it's delegated to officers, which in itself is mindful to approve, subject to receiving comments from BAE. Moved by Councillor Mulholland, seconded by the Vice Chairman. All in favour of approval as described. Anyone against? That's clearly unanimous once again. And now we go to item 4. Kirkham.
Chairman, unless Councillor O'Rourke's just dashed out of the room, I don't know whether you want to wait
give him
for
a
him.
moment to return. Right, Andrew?
Right, the application that I'm looking at now, item 4, relates to the manse at Kirkgate at Kirkham. So it's a rest home, care home, sorry. It's located just off the edge of the town centre. So this is the Kirkgate Centre. This is Polton Street, Freckleton Street, and the Fishstones Market Square here. So it's quite a sizable building. Been there quite a while. It's in an area where you've got a mixture of residential and commercial properties. Obviously, it backs onto Polton Street. The application here is for a 3-storey extension to the building. It provides an additional 23 bedrooms, which puts the total on site to 67. It's exactly the same as a planning permission that was granted 2019, but which has expired without being implemented. So the applicant's just looking to re-establish that planning permission. It's here at committee because the Town Council have objected due to the lack of any increase in parking facilities for the staff or visitors to the premises. They've also referred to overlooking specifically to the Chestnut Close dwellings, which are one of the neighbouring properties to the site. I put on there, there were no neighbour comments on the application, and the application is recommended for approval. So just looking at it slightly closer, this blue box is the existing building. So it's a C-shaped building providing accommodation with an access point here and a sort of central car parking area, courtyard area here. The application site is out the back, which is currently a detached dwelling and its garden. So the proposal is to demolish that dwelling and then build an extension into that, to the care home into that area. There's a sort of a cemetery graveyard here. These are the Chestnut Close properties that are referenced. The nearest properties are actually here, which is some flats on Britannia Court, which are on the opposite side of Marsden Street, I think it is at that point. So that's just a slightly zoomed in picture, so you can see the house, its garden, its access point, which are lost. And this is the development that's proposed. So it's a slightly awkward shaped site, or as a result you get an awkward shaped building that wraps around the edge of the site, in the same way that much of the other development wraps around the edge of the site. You get this sort of internal courtyard area between the new development and the existing, but there's no, as the Town Council said, the access point here and the parking arrangements remain as they are at present. Just see some pictures of it. So this is the view from Marsden Street. So this is where the building would go, is where this hedge is. Sits alongside that dwelling, and it doesn't go where that hedge is. It goes further up here because that's the boundary to the cemetery. So it's up into this area. This is the house that's demolished. This is the plans that we have of the extension. So it's a 3-storey. It's slightly, you can see from that picture, there's a slight change in levels. So it's a 3-storey in most part building, some elements of 2-storey. And as with rest homes, it's got windows that wrap around the outside. Plan view, central corridor, windows, bedrooms either side, overall 3 floors. There's obviously just 2 there. These are some of the other vantage points of it. So this is looking up Marsden Street. So the Britannia Court nearest properties are here. The garden to the dwelling, so the application site is here. One element, well, I'll come on to that in a sec, but in terms of the relationship to neighbours, you're going to end up with this picture's taken stood within the site, but the development comes up to that boundary, so it faces those neighbours. Seeing the report that the separation distance is around 22 metres, which is sufficient for dealing with privacy issues. In terms of some of the highway issues, this is the existing access point. This is quite a dated street view picture, but it shows the access point onto Marsden Street there, and the parking area is now into this courtyard. This is when an earlier extension was being built. This is the dwelling that's being removed. So one part of the scheme is that you see there's a bit of a pinch point in the footway. So the scheme sets that back to provide a standard width footway around that corner. That's shown here. So at the moment you get that pinch point is there. So the scheme sets it back to give you a standard width footway around there. So obviously it's on a bend, so it's a pedestrian safety benefit from that aspect of the scheme. So pulling the matters together, it's obviously an existing facility. It's in a sustainable settlement location where expansion of such uses is appropriate. Obviously the loss of the dwelling is something that counts against it, albeit it's just a single dwelling, and the windfall elements of the local plan are designed to deal with such minor gains and losses. In terms of the scale, it is a much bigger building than the existing dwelling. It is right up against the road, albeit the existing dwelling is. There is a real mix of dwelling sizes and scales around there, so the view is that it's not one that's unduly harmful to that particular street scene. Neighbouring impacts, as I showed from the images and mentioned earlier, you've got that separation to the Britannia Court properties, which is adequate, as well as a bit of an offset relationship. The views to Chestnut Court are further 10 metres away, so the Town Council's concerns, whilst they are a near neighbour, they are adequately separated to avoid that significant impact. In terms of parking, the access is suitable. Clearly the Marsden Street access point is one that's got good visibility and a reasonable wide access point. The parking isn't increased, but it does meet the parking standard requirements for this type of accommodation, even with the larger unit, larger number of number of residents within the site. So they look at a 1-to-5 ratio. One parking space for every 5 residents, and at the 67 beds that would deliver that requirement. The County Council have been consulted clearly as the Highway Authority. They've not raised any objections to the application. Mentioned before the footpath benefit. So as a conclusion, look to grant planning permission, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Rose.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, don't worry, I'm not going to go for refusal. But what I am trying to do is, if the policy regarding parking is looked at and is in any way changed, I'm hoping that we can look in future at the changing parking in Kirkham. You'll remember at the last meeting, there were 16 dwellings on Station Road, and that report talked about parking being adequate because of the town centre parking, and this also refers to adequacy of parking because of the town centre. If Mark was here, I'm sure he would agree with me that this is changing. You all know about the regeneration in Kirkham. Well, there'll be no parking on Market Square. We're losing some on-street parking, and there'll be a loss of some 25 spaces. And we know that there is a very good car park which belongs to the Town Council at the back of our community centre, but things are changing and we're losing more parking spaces. And the regeneration is to try and get more people into town, not to drive them out. And I know the government are saying that we should not use cars as much, but we all live in the real world and we know that people will use cars. So I think we need to look at the situation as it is changing in future when reports are written. Now, you know, I know, again, it's said that there's no loss of car parking, and I agree with that. However, it again refers to the fact of adequacy in the town centre. And as I said, last month, 16 dwellings were approved. on Station Road, and it was saying there's adequate car parking in the town centre. So all I'm asking for is that, you know, the up-to-date parking is addressed each time we look at this. Because if there's less and less parking in the town centre and more building, then there's going to be problems. And that's my concern, and I think it's a concern of the town council. And I know last time this was approved, and I think the town council were happy with it. I think their concern is the one I've just expressed. We're seeing less parking, parking is being removed, and we're seeing more building. So that is really all I want to say on this. I just want up-to-date looks at the town centre car parking as it is going forward. I know the LCC, in their observations, has said it's okay, but I think they sit on the bottoms in the office, and they don't really know Kirkham as we know it. And I don't think they come out very often. And so, you know, I think local events should be looked at more closely. I also have to comment about the cycle parking, because after the last meeting, I asked you, Chairman, when the last time you came to the meeting was on a cycle. And you told me you've never used a cycle. I won't go into the reason that you gave, because I don't want to embarrass you and I don't want to make the committee blush. But I really feel that, you know, again, cycling, I'm sure, is approved by a great many people, but I don't think that in actual fact a lot of people use cycles to go to and fro. And that's all I have to say. In future, can we just make sure that we look at up-to-date parking and what is actually available and what is happening in Kirkham? Thank you.
Councillor Rhodes, and just to say that the chairman approves of your positive contribution in the real world.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's an issue which the planning committee finds difficult to address. Going back to the major developments in Wharton, where there was an accumulative effect on traffic with successive planning applications being approved, and county couldn't address those issues, couldn't get in their mind about the accumulative effect. You've got this in reverse, that parking is becoming more and more of an important issue in Kirkham, and I appreciate your contribution. Councillor Nulty? Oh, Andrew.
Can I perhaps come back on Councillor Odes' point there? In the report and the presentation, we refer back to the parking standards for parking levels. The local plan has a policy on that, and that simply says an SPD will be produced and will give guidance on that. As we sit here, that SPD hasn't been produced. So we relate back to the most recently adopted parking standards document, which is one from it's a Lancashire County Council document from the Joint Lancashire Structured Plan from 2006 to 2016. So it's clearly quite a dated document. Now that the partial review of the local plan has been completed and adopted, the officers in the local plans team here are looking at doing a series of SPDs, supplementary planning documents, and one of those that they're looking at scoping out relates to parking standards. So it may well be, I don't know the definite timescale, but it may be that either the next or the next after that meeting will cover, there will be a report about the scope of what the parking standards that filed look to draft will cover. Now that is likely to cover a different levels of parking to be required for different uses, but it's your document, so it could also look at different levels of parking in different either geographical areas or different, you know, in a town centre we will have this ratio, in a rural area we will have that ratio. So there's that opportunity to build that into the document. Now that obviously takes a bit of time to produce and consult on and adopt and so bring into use. But I think that there's perhaps light at the end of the parking standards tunnel in terms of giving you as a committee, and us as officers, some clarity on the issue that Councillor Rhodes so passionately expressed.
I could just come back, I think the officer has just underlined what I've been saying. It's all about documents and it's all about policies yet to come, and it doesn't look at what's actually happening on the ground at the time the report is written. And I do understand that officers haven't got the time to keep coming out, but I do think if they just perhaps telephoned members and we could give them an update on exactly what's happening, that may be helpful. I know they have to, as we do, put in place policies, but things are changing all the time. And I think you'll admit Kirkham has taken an awful lot of building over the years, and right up to today, we're taking more. And I don't think it's the fact that we're against the building if it's suitable, but we have to look. Planning's all about what's going on and what is on the ground and how development will impact on the existing residents, and that's why I think it's so important to keep up to date on what is actually going on. And as I say, if Mark was here, I think he would concur with what I'm saying, because we're having an awful lot of difficulty at the moment with the regen in relation to parking. And we were going to purchase a Kirkgate Centre, and there's parking there, but that's no longer going ahead. And that parking was going to be provided for public car parking. That will no longer go ahead. So we're seeing shrinkage of parking in the town centre. It's not what we want. Thank you.
The point very succinctly. The chair has referred to this situation, ludicrous situation, where the parking standards are determined by a defunct organisation. The Joint Lancashire Structure Plan went out of existence years and years ago. Andrew gave you a particular year when it did become defunct. So I will use my position to try and accelerate that supplementary planning document coming to this committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Nulty. Never.
Yeah, it was just to add to that really that, you know, looking at that, it doesn't look too bad, does it? And it looks like the roads are reasonably wide and what have you. But if you actually drive down Marsden Street particularly, it's always completely jammed up with traffic, with things delivering, because there's an old people's sheltered accommodation on one side and there's a builder's yard or something. And it is a nightmare. So it appears that there's parking there, but in reality, there isn't. And of course, we got the one on Freckleton Street, the old post office site, where there was no parking with that either. So the whole thing is compounded, and it's.
We, as a planning authority, did turn down the one on Freckleton Street on the basis of no parking. It was only agreed.
And it was. Yeah, but you know, the result is there is no parking there. So, and in areas where it does get parked up all the time. But the other comment I know it's been approved once and it's there and it's what have you, but I think when that building is actually built, it will be very overbearing on Marsden Street on that corner, because it's a very tight road. Nothing we can do about it, and I'm not against it, but I think the reality of the situation, we'll think, gosh, did we really approve that? But yes, keeping in mind parking in Kirkham is essential. We can't keep adding things with no, because if you're in the middle of a city and there's a bus every 5 minutes, that's fine. But in Kirkham, it's not like that. And everybody really wants a car, and we're not providing space for that. Thank you.
A lot of the concerns that were expressed, I've already expressed some of these during briefing, etc. Because, I mean, you know, you look at this particular application, and there's two things here. There's two things I want to say about it. Is at one level, you understand that the structure and the parking standards are outdated, outmoded. They need reviewing, and the welcome news about the SPD, and although that doesn't deal with immediate, you know, which is the point that Councillor Ode was making, it gives us some hope that in the future we're going to take a fresh look at this.
The near future.
In the near future, yeah, which is welcomed, I think, by everybody on the committee, I suspect. So, but when you look at this, there is another aspect of it, is that because the policy, you know, we want best outcomes as much as possible in planning. That was the other thing about planning. It's not just doing things that are within the remit of the planning standards and the regulations and the framework and the structure. It's actually wanting to reshape and make it a better space, better world. What I'm really disappointed with about this is that here we have a situation, and by the way, you know, we can't refuse this on planning grounds, I accept that. But it is a serious point that you have a building that is adding 22 additional bedrooms in quite on an intense site. The developer, I'm going to say this, I'm disappointed with the developer, because the developer, despite the standards argument, still has the option of going, you know what, we're putting 23 additional bedrooms in here, we ought to at least make an effort to create some additional, it might be 4, 6 additional spaces, but of course that then compromises, you know, the plan, and you're probably looking at a reduction. So there's a counter argument that goes, well, you'll have fewer bedrooms, fewer people with those sort of care support, etc., and all the rest of it. But when you look at the plan, you know, you've got a courtyard again. So, you know, and do you remember this resonates with the other one that we looked at, wasn't it? Station Road, where, you know, it is nice to have outside space, it is nice to have a little bit of greenery, whatever it is, and you've got a sort of close being created there, and we all you know, welcome that. But I just wish developers would take the view that as long as, you know, we don't necessarily always have to go with, you know, it has to be viable and they want a profit, etc. But also there's the sort of quality of the development and what it's offering. And to actually increase a development by a third with no additional car parking at all, not even a gesture, and to simply say that because within the structure plan, the parking standards, you know, we're allowed to do this. I sort of say to some developers, well, you might be allowed to do it, but show a bit of vision and show a bit of ambition in terms of actually creating something that goes beyond what the minimum requirements are. And I know that is perhaps in some people's eyes a naive argument, you know, because developers will try to get as much development on a particular site as they can because they want returns. And I'm not knocking this. I think this is a good development, but it's the parking. And I am going to take on the points that you made, because they were up there with me as well, about the development of Kirkham and about the investment that's going into Kirkham, some displacement of parking spaces, which mean that Marsden Street and that will become under greater pressure in terms of parking. But I finish with the point that we are going to be looking at this with this SPD, and hopefully that will help us to have more flexibility in terms of different localities. But clearly it's not a planning reason, and I will be supporting this. But I just wanted to say I endorse many of the points you've made.
Councillor Harman.
Yeah, first of all, I've got to agree with Richard that, you know, developers are focused on profit, and if they've got any wiggle room, they'll wiggle in it, because they don't care in the main, not all. So I'm sure some there are decent ones out there one day. Question on parking. At the moment, how's the parking coping with as before the development? How's it doing now? How much struggle does it put on the road? How much pressure does it put on? How many extra staff will this bring in? And yes, I appreciate there'll be 23 more families potentially visiting, but on an operational basis, how many more staff will be needed for another 23 rooms? And what extra pressure will that put on the car parking that there is now?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer in terms of the staffing ratio and how that changes. What I do know is that we wrote to 80 properties around there, and not one of them wrote back to us to make any comments on the application. And that perhaps indicates to me that I can get that there is it looks as though there should be parking pressures. And those 80 properties have had the opportunity to say the parking around here is a nightmare, what you're doing, not providing any more parking. And none of them have done. So that kind of indicates to me that there isn't perhaps an actual issue at the moment, but, you know, clearly, you know, that's all I can assume. That's just an assumption.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm happy to move the recommendation on this. I believe the parking issue is to a large extent, for this application, a red herring, notwithstanding the issues in the Greater Kirkham, which I completely recognise, completely agree with Councillor Rhodes. In terms of care homes, there's very, very little parking required. And I'm speaking from experience here of having been a regular visitor to one which had, I think, 30 residents and 5 or 6 spaces. There was never, ever an issue for visitor parking. Even on high days and holidays, it wasn't a problem. Most of the staff at these care homes are, for whatever reason, arrived by public transport or by bicycle or on foot. Again, a separate issue, nothing to do with planning. Are these people paid enough that they can't afford a car? So I think in the real world, and this is what we're dealing with, I'm more than happy to move the recommendation. I think the fact 80 residents haven't come back with a negative comment suggests it isn't a problem at all for this application, strength of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application, some of our members may recognise this site as we've dealt with a couple of recent applications on here in the past. So it's the site at Pathways on the southwest side of Blackpool Road within the area of separation between Kirkham and Newton. So this is the existing Pathways site, and the application relates to this area to the north and west, and it's for the erection of a commercial stable building with a new access track. So the situation as it stands at present, this is a garden centre that's got an established use for retail as part of a certificate of lawfulness. There's an existing stable building here that's used as a livery for 10 stalls that has a separate permission back from 2006. This is the existing retail building, and there's a kind of a plant nursery and external storage areas here for the garden centre. This is an existing dwelling at Pathways, which is a bungalow, and there's a neighbouring bungalow here at Long Acres. And this area is an authorised use as an overspill parking area for the garden centre. So just a bit of background in terms of the permissions that have been granted. So 2 planning permissions granted in 2019 and 2021 for residential development, which involved the demolition of all the existing buildings on the site, save for the existing bungalow at Pathways as part of this permission, and the site's redevelopment for 5 bungalows in total in each scheme. So neither of these permissions have been implemented to date. The 2019 one is extant until October this year, and the 2021 permission is extant until October 2024. So we're looking at this application with these permissions in mind, but assessing it on the basis of circumstances as they exist at present on the site. So there's no certainty that these planning permissions for housing will definitely be implemented. So we've got to look at the application on the basis of present circumstances. So moving on to the photographs, this is the existing access from Blackpool Road, and there's some parking laybys here. The bungalow at Long Acres, the existing bungalow and garage at Pathways, and then this overspill parking area here to the front of the site. This is just showing the visibility displays available at that junction. So this is looking west and east onto Blackpool Road. So there's very long visibility displays available in both directions onto the highway. So this is the view from Blackpool Road. There's a roadside hedgerow that you can see over the top of it. It's about just over 1 metre in height, flanking the back edge of the footpath. I've just marked the proposed stable site here. So this is the actual building itself, broadly where that's going to be positioned. You'll be able to see in later photographs, but there is a 2 metre high bund around a floodlit manege that exists at the rear of the site at present. And then the access track is to meander up through here, past the bungalow and through the overspill parking area onto that tarmac drive at the front. Ground level falls away in this direction, away from Blackpool Road, and these are existing buildings at Church Farm. So at the moment you've got these grazing paddocks that intervene between Pathways and Church Farm. This is the manege at the back. As I mentioned, there's this approximately 2 metre high bund around 2 sides of the existing exercise arena, and this is to be retained as part of those housing schemes on the western part of the site. So this is where the proposed stable building's to go. Broadly, the stables is to occupy a rectangular footprint within this area here. You can see the backdrop of the existing stables here and the bund to the manege. And these are the grazing paddocks that intervene between Church Farm and Pathways here. And that's the existing livery stables on site at present that's to be demolished as part of the housing scheme. So this is the proposed layout. There's 3 main aspects. The stable building over here to the southwest corner, behind that manege and the bund that surrounds it. and to the rear of the existing pathway site and the stables. You've then got the second element, which is this access track, quite a long access track, 185 metres in total along its full length, that then opens, starts off as a narrower strip up here with 4 separate passing places. So this is a 3 metre wide track, doesn't allow two-way traffic flow, so you have to have these passing spaces to let vehicles pass one another. Accessed off the existing tarmac drive that we saw in the earlier photograph, and then opening onto this car parking area here. So the width of that is sufficient for 19 standard size car parking spaces, and then you've got this larger horse box trailer parking area here and a manure store next to the stable building. There's a continuous hedge and 20 separate trees interspersed within that, proposed along the northern edge of that access track to provide screening adjacent to the existing field. So these are the floor plans and elevations of the stable building. So 10 separate stalls, access from a central corridor. It's to provide a commercial livery with this lean-to on the side, which is providing a tack and hay store. Concrete block plinth, and then timber boarding above with a sheet metal roof. So in terms of the main issues, it's within the area of separation, so there's limitations on the types of development that can happen within those areas. One of those permits uses appropriate to a rural area, including uses which would help to diversify the rural economy of a type and scale which would not harm the effectiveness of the gap between settlements in protecting the identity and distinctiveness of settlements. Now, it's widely accepted that stables are a use that's appropriate in a rural area as a matter of principle, and that they're typically found in rural locations in order that it's capable of falling within the first part of that criteria. So the second parts then relate to whether or not it helps to diversify the rural economy, which in this case this would, given that it's a commercial enterprise, and that it's finally of a type and scale which would not harm the effectiveness of the gap between settlements. So in terms of the area of separation is intended to provide that gap between the settlements of Kirkham and Newton, so that when you're travelling between those settlements, there's a perception that you're leaving one settlement and entering another, so that there's some relief from urbanisation between those two settlements. Now, the key to that, at the moment, obviously, there is some ribbon development alongside Blackpool Road, so the key is the effectiveness of the gaps that exist between existing developments. So in this case, we've got that relatively wide gap between Pathways and Church Farm that gives you this what I referred to as this green gap between those two existing uses, and that's the key in protecting the identity and distinctiveness of the settlements and the purposes of the area of separation. So the stable building, as we saw, it was tucked away on lower lying land behind the existing Pathways site, so whether or not that remains as it is at the moment or whether it's developed for housing, you'll still have those buildings in the foreground, and the stables will be relatively discreetly located behind. The building's a low-rise building which is finished in materials. It's intended to appear as an agricultural building within the landscape. The gravel hard-standing areas, the key here is the screen that's provided by that continuous tree and hedgerow planting. Obviously that vertical planting will screen much of the track and the park cars that exist at its western end to minimise any urbanising impacts arising